In a small, quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone seemed to know each other's business, life appeared picture-perfect. Houses stood neatly aligned along tree-lined streets, with perfectly trimmed lawns and flower beds bursting in vibrant colors. It was the kind of place people dreamed of living in, safe, peaceful, and welcoming. For Sarah Miller, this neighborhood felt like a fresh start after years of struggling to find stability for her family. She had recently moved into a cozy 2-story house with her 2 daughters. Her youngest, Emily, was a bright and cheerful 15-year-old who loved art, music, and storytelling. But Emily also faced challenges most teenagers didn't. She used a wheelchair due to a condition that made walking difficult. Despite these hurdles, Emily had a heart full of determination and a smile that could light up even the darkest days. At first, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors greeted them warmly when they arrived, helping carry boxes and offering homemade cookies as a welcome gesture. Even the local kids came by to introduce themselves to Emily, eager to make her feel included. Sarah worked hard to ensure their new home was comfortable and accessible for Emily. One of the first things she did was install a sturdy wooden ramp leading up to the front door so Emily could come and go easily. To Sarah, it wasn't just a practical addition. It symbolized independence and freedom for her daughter. Little did she know, this simple modification would soon become the center of an unexpected storm. Enter Karen Wilkins, the unofficial queen bee of the neighborhood. Karen was known for her sharp tongue, impeccable fashion sense, and an almost obsessive devotion to maintaining the community's standards. As the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, she prided herself on enforcing rules about lawn care, exterior paint colors, and anything else she deemed important for preserving the neighborhood's charm. While some residents appreciated her dedication, others found her relentless nitpicking exhausting. But no one dared cross her. Karen had a way of making life miserable for those who disagreed with her. It all started innocently enough. A week after the Millers settled in, Sarah received a polite but firm letter from the HOA. It mentioned that the wheelchair ramp outside their home might not comply with the association's guidelines regarding curb appeal. The note suggested replacing the wooden structure with something less visible or moving it to the backyard instead. Confused, Sarah reread the letter several times. How could something as essential as a wheelchair ramp be considered unappealing? She decided to address the issue directly and reached out to Karen to explain the situation. When Sarah met Karen face to face, she quickly realized why the woman had earned such a reputation. Dressed in designer clothes and armed with a clipboard, Karen listened to Sarah's explanation without much empathy. "I understand your concerns," Karen said coolly. "But the HOA has standards to uphold. We can't have every homeowner doing whatever they please. It affects property values." Sarah tried to reason with her, explaining that federal laws protected disabled individuals' rights to reasonable accommodations. But Karen brushed her off, insisting there must be a compromise, even if it meant spending thousands of dollars to redesign the ramp. Things escalated quickly after that meeting. Within days, more letters began arriving at the Millers' doorstep. Some were official notices from the HOA, citing minor infractions like weeds poking through cracks in the driveway, or curtains that didn't match the approved color palette. Others were anonymous notes scrawled in messy handwriting, accusing Sarah of ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic. At first, Sarah dismissed them as petty complaints, but the constant criticism weighed heavily on her. Worse still, Emily noticed the tension building around her. She overheard snippets of conversations between her mom and friends, saw the pile of letters growing on the kitchen counter, and felt the shift in energy at home. Slow the harassment took its toll. Emily withdrew into herself, spending less time outside and avoiding interactions with neighbors she once thought were friendly. What Sarah didn't realize yet was that Karen wasn't just targeting her family, out of spite or boredom. There was something deeper driving Karen's actions, a need for control, a desire to assert dominance over anyone who dared challenge her authority. And unfortunately for Sarah and Emily, they had unknowingly stepped into the line of fire. What started as a disagreement over a wheelchair ramp was about to spiral into a battle far bigger than either of them could have imagined. The calm surface of their seemingly idyllic neighborhood hid currents of resentment, secrecy, and power struggles waiting to boil over. The tension between Sarah and Karen quickly escalated from polite disagreements to outright hostility. After their initial meeting, Karen made it clear that she wasn't going to back down on the issue of the wheelchair ramp. Instead, she doubled down, sending increasingly demanding letters to Sarah's home. Each one carried the same message. The ramp had to go or be altered in a way that satisfied the HOA's aesthetic standards. The tone of these letters grew harsher with each passing week, shifting from polite reminders to thinly veiled threats about fines and legal action if Sarah failed to comply. Sarah tried her best to stay calm and rational. She knew the law was on her side. Federal protections like the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, ensured that Emily had the right to reasonable accommodations for her disability. But explaining this to Karen felt like talking to a brick wall. No matter how many times Sarah cited these laws or shared documentation proving the ramp's necessity, Karen dismissed her arguments. Rules are rules, Karen would say with a shrug, as though the mere existence of an HOA guideline outweighed basic human decency. As the days turned into weeks, Karen's behavior became more aggressive. She started visiting Sarah's house, unannounced, often showing up at inconvenient times like early mornings or late evenings. On one occasion, she arrived just as Sarah was helping Emily get ready for school. Without so much as a hello, Karen launched into yet another lecture about the ramp. "It's not just about your property values," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Think about the neighborhood. What kind of message does this send to everyone else?" Sarah bit her tongue, knowing better than to engage in a shouting match while Emily was within earshot. But inside she seethed with frustration. How could someone be so blind to the needs of others? The ramp wasn't some frivolous addition. It was essential for Emily's independence. Every time Karen brought up the issue, it felt like a personal attack on her daughter's dignity. For Emily, who already struggled with feelings of being different because of her disability, hearing Karen talk about the ramp as though it were a nuisance only deepened her sense of isolation. Karen didn't stop there. She began rallying other neighbors to her cause, spreading rumors and misinformation to turn public opinion against the Millers. At first, it was subtle. A comment here, a suggestion there. "Have you seen that ramp? It really sticks out," she'd say during casual conversations. Or, "I'm sure they mean well, but doesn't it set a bad precedent?" Slowly but surely, Karen planted seeds of doubt in people's minds, framing the ramp as a threat to the neighborhood's harmony, rather than a necessary accommodation. Some neighbors fell for Karen's tactics, hook, line, and sinker. They nodded, along when she spoke, agreeing that the ramp did look out of place. Others remained silent, unwilling to challenge Karen directly, but also too afraid to stand up for Sarah and Emily. A few brave souls tried to defend the Millers, pointing out that the ramp was vital for Emily's mobility. But their voices were drowned out by Karen's louder, more persistent campaign. Before long, what had started as a private disagreement between two women morphed into a neighborhood-wide debate. For Sarah, the situation felt surreal. She couldn't believe how quickly things had spiraled out of control. One day, she overheard two neighbors whispering about her family as they walked past her driveway. "Did you hear about the Millers?" one said. "Apparently they're refusing to follow the rules." The other neighbor shook her head disapprovingly. "It's not fair to everyone else," she replied. Sarah wanted to confront them, to explain that the ramp wasn't about defiance. It was about giving Emily the same opportunities as anyone else. But she held back, knowing it wouldn't make a difference. People had already made up their minds, based on Karen's narrative. Meanwhile, Emily bore the brunt of the backlash. Once eager to explore her new surroundings and make friends, she now hesitated to leave the house. When she did venture outside, she noticed sideways glances and hushed conversations among the neighbors. Some kids who had initially been friendly stopped inviting her to hang out. Even adults avoided eye contact when she passed by. It was as if the entire neighborhood had turned against her, simply because of a wooden structure leading up to her front door. One afternoon, Sarah found Emily, sitting alone in her room, staring blankly at a sketch pad. Normally, drawing was Emily's favorite way to express herself, but today, The page remained empty. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Sarah asked gently, sitting beside her. Emily hesitated before answering. "Do you think I ruin everything?" She whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "Is it my fault everyone hates us?" Sarah's heart broke hearing those words. She pulled Emily close, holding her tightly. "No, baby, none of this is your fault," she reassured her. "You're amazing, and we're doing everything we can to make sure you have what you need. Don't ever let anyone make you feel less than you are." Though her words brought some comfort to Emily, Sarah knew they weren't enough. As long as Karen continued her crusade, the harassment wouldn't stop, and neither would its impact on Emily's self-esteem. Despite the growing pressure, Sarah refused to give in. She reached out to local disability advocacy groups for advice, hoping to find allies who understood the challenges her family faced. Representatives from these organizations offered guidance and resources, including information on legal protections and strategies for dealing with difficult HOAs. Armed with this knowledge, Sarah decided to take a stand, not just for her family, but for anyone else who might face similar discrimination. But standing up to Karen came with risks. The more Sarah resisted, the angrier Karen became. Her visits to the Miller household grew more frequent and intrusive. She left passive-aggressive notes taped to their mailbox and parked her car across the street for hours, watching their every move. Neighbors reported seeing her snap photos of minor imperfections around the property: a loose shingle on the roof, a patch of dead grass near the sidewalk, as though gathering evidence for some imaginary court case. It was exhausting, infuriating, and downright bizarre. Still, Sarah pressed on. She attended HOA meetings, speaking up whenever Karen brought up the ramp. She distributed flyers around the neighborhood, educating residents about disability rights and the importance of inclusivity. And she documented every interaction with Karen, saving letters, emails, and even recordings of their conversations, in case she needed proof later. Little did she know her efforts were about to uncover something far bigger than a dispute over curb appeal. What lay beneath Karen's relentless behavior was a web of secrets that would shock the entire community and change everything forever. As the conflict between Sarah and Karen intensified, so did the toll it took on the Miller family. Every day brought a new challenge, a fresh insult, or another attempt to wear them down. What had started as a disagreement over a wheelchair ramp was now spiraling into something far more sinister. A relentless campaign of intimidation that left Sarah questioning whether she'd made the right decision to stand her ground. Karen's tactics grew bolder and more invasive. She no longer limited herself to formal letters or awkward confrontations at the front door. Instead, she began using underhanded methods to make life unbearable for the Millers. Late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, the phone would ring. At first, Sarah assumed it was a wrong number or telemarketer, but after several nights of unanswered calls, she decided to pick up during one particularly persistent ring. The line was silent except for faint breathing on the other end. When she asked who it was, there was no response, just the sound of the caller hanging up. These late-night calls became a regular occurrence, leaving Sarah exhausted and on edge. She tried blocking the number, but it always seemed to change. Sometimes the calls came from private numbers, other times they appeared to be local. Each time the phone rang after dark, Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Was it Karen? Or someone else emboldened by her rhetoric? The uncertainty gnawed at her, making it hard to relax even within the walls of her own home. But the harassment didn't stop there. One morning, as Sarah opened the mailbox to retrieve the mail, she found an envelope addressed to her in blocky, handwritten letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a chilling message. "Your kind doesn't belong here." There was no signature, just those cold, accusing words staring back at her. Sarah's hands trembled as she read it over and over, trying to process what she was seeing. Who could have written this, and why? She immediately called the police to report the note, hoping they might investigate. But when officers arrived, their response was discouraging. "Without fingerprints or any identifying information, there's not much we can do," one of them explained apologetically. They suggested keeping records of all incidents and advised Sarah to install security cameras around the property. While well-meaning, their advice offered little comfort. The idea that someone hated her family enough to send such a hateful message, and that she had no way of knowing who it was, left her feeling vulnerable and exposed. Despite the mounting pressure, Sarah refused to let fear dictate her actions. She installed the recommended cameras and continued documenting every incident, adding photos of the threatening notes and timestamps of the mysterious phone calls to her growing file. She also reached out to her network of advocates and legal advisors seeking guidance on how to protect her family while staying firm in their stance against Karen's bullying. For Emily, the situation only grew worse. The once bright teenager who loved painting vibrant landscapes and writing stories about brave heroes now spent most of her time alone in her room. The constant scrutiny and hostility from the neighborhood weighed heavily on her. Even going outside to enjoy the fresh air felt like stepping into enemy territory. Neighbors who used to smile and wave now avoided eye contact or whispered behind her back. Some kids outright ignored her when she passed by, pretending not to hear her greetings. It was as if the entire community had turned its back on her simply because of a wooden ramp leading up to her front door. One evening, Sarah noticed Emily sitting quietly on the couch, staring blankly at the television without really watching it. Concerned, she sat beside her and gently asked, "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Emily hesitated before answering. "Do you think they'll ever stop hating us?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with sadness. "I just want things to go back to normal." Sarah wrapped an arm around her daughter, pulling her close. "I know it feels impossible right now, but we're doing the right thing," she said firmly. "We're standing up for what matters, not just for us, but for anyone else who might face this kind of unfair treatment. Things will get better, I promise." Though her words brought some reassurance, Sarah couldn't shake the guilt she felt. No child should have to endure this kind of emotional torment, especially not because of something as essential as accessibility. Karen, meanwhile, showed no signs of backing down. If anything, she seemed emboldened by Sarah's resistance. She began organizing secret meetings with other HOA members, rallying support for stricter enforcement of the rules. Flyers appeared on neighbors' doors inviting them to attend these gatherings where Karen would rail against the Millers and accuse them of undermining community standards. Her speeches were laced with thinly veiled threats about what would happen if others dared to follow suit. "If we don't draw the line now," she warned, "soon everyone will think they can do whatever they want." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Here was Karen preaching about unity and conformity, while simultaneously tearing the neighborhood apart with her divisive behavior. People were beginning to take sides and tensions simmered beneath the surface. Those who supported Sarah admired her courage and determination, while others sided with Karen out of fear or misplaced loyalty. The divide grew wider with each passing day, turning what had once been a tight-knit community into a battleground of resentment and mistrust. Then came the incident that pushed Sarah's resolve to its limits. One chilly autumn evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, Sarah and Emily returned home from running errands. As they pulled into the driveway, they were met with a sight that stopped them both in their tracks. Spray painted across the garage door in bold, angry letters were the words, "Leave now." The red paint gleamed ominously under the dim light of the street lamp, sending a clear and unmistakable message. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Shock and disbelief washed over Sarah as she stared at the graffiti, her mind racing to process what she was seeing. Beside her, Emily clutched the armrest of her wheelchair, her knuckles white with tension. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Stay in the car," she instructed, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. She stepped out cautiously, scanning the area for any sign of movement or trouble. The street was eerily quiet, as though the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. After calling the police yet again, Sarah turned her attention to cleaning up the mess. Armed with buckets of soapy water and scrub brushes, she worked tirelessly to remove the paint from the garage door. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, curious but hesitant to approach. Only a handful offered help, and even then, it was brief and awkward. Most kept their distance, either too intimidated by Karen's influence or unwilling to get involved. Unbeknownst to anyone, including Karen, the FBI had already taken notice of her activities. Months earlier, federal agents had begun investigating her for embezzlement and fraud, linked to her previous roles in other HOAs. Evidence suggested she had siphoned thousands of dollars meant for community projects, using fake identities and forged documents to cover her tracks. The investigation had been ongoing for some time, with agents monitoring her movements and communications closely. What they hadn't anticipated was how quickly her feud with Sarah would escalate, and how much damage she was willing to inflict along the way. As the days passed, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, frustration, and fear battled for dominance, but beneath it all was an unshakable determination to see this through. She knew the fight wasn't just about her family anymore. It was about setting a precedent, showing others that kindness and inclusivity mattered more than arbitrary rules. And though the road ahead promised to be long and difficult, Sarah vowed to keep pushing forward, for Emily, for justice, and for the hope of a brighter future. As the harassment against the Millers reached its peak, a quiet but significant force was already at work behind the scenes. Unknown to Sarah, Emily, and even Karen herself, federal agents had been watching Karen Wilkins for months. What started as whispers of financial misconduct in her past HOA roles had grown into a full-blown investigation, uncovering layers of deceit that painted Karen not just as a neighborhood bully, but as a criminal mastermind hiding in plain sight. The FBI's interest in Karen began long before she crossed paths with the Millers. It all traced back to her previous position as treasurer of an HOA in another state. At first glance, Karen had seemed like the ideal candidate, organized, detail-oriented, and fiercely protective of community standards. But beneath her polished exterior lay a web of lies. Former neighbors from that community reported discrepancies in their accounts, claiming funds earmarked for repairs and improvements mysteriously disappeared. When questioned, Karen provided vague explanations blaming accounting errors or miscommunications. Unsatisfied, a few former board members filed complaints, prompting local authorities to dig deeper. What they uncovered was alarming. Records showed that Karen had funneled thousands of dollars into personal bank accounts using fake invoices and forged signatures. She created shell companies to mask the transfers, making it appear as though legitimate contractors were being paid for services never rendered. The scheme was cleverly executed, leaving little evidence for investigators to trace, at least initially. By the time suspicions grew loud enough to warrant action, Karen had already moved on to a new neighborhood, leaving chaos in her wake. This pattern repeated itself in multiple locations. Each time Karen joined a new HOA, she wormed her way into positions of power, often becoming treasurer or president within months. Her charm and charisma made it easy to win over trusting neighbors, while her meticulous attention to detail allowed her to cover her tracks effectively. But the cracks eventually showed. In one community, residents noticed unfinished projects despite hefty budget allocations. In another, audits revealed unexplained gaps in financial records. Complaints trickled in, catching the eye of federal investigators who saw a pattern emerging. By the time Karen arrived in Sarah and Emily's neighborhood, the FBI had built a substantial case against her. Agents monitored her emails, tracked her online activity, and followed her movements, gathering evidence to support allegations of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement. They knew she was dangerous, not only because of her crimes but also because of her ability to manipulate those around her. Still, they needed more concrete proof before making an arrest. That's where the feud with the Millers came in, an unexpected twist that would bring Karen's downfall closer than anyone anticipated. Karen's obsession with Sarah and Emily became a critical piece of the puzzle. To the outside world, her relentless campaign against the family appeared to be nothing more than petty tyranny. But to the FBI, it revealed something far darker: desperation. As pressure mounted from the ongoing investigation, Karen's behavior grew increasingly erratic. Her fixation on the wheelchair ramp, and by extension the Millers, wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was a distraction, a way to assert control and deflect attention from her real problems. The late-night phone calls, anonymous notes, and graffiti weren't merely acts of harassment. They were red flags signaling someone trying desperately to maintain their grip on power. Federal agents took note of every move Karen made. Surveillance footage captured her lurking near the Miller home late at night, snapping photos of minor infractions and scribbling notes. Emails between her and other HOA members revealed her efforts to rally support for stricter enforcement of the rules, framing the Millers as troublemakers intent on disrupting the neighborhood. Even her impassioned speeches at secret meetings were recorded, providing damning evidence of her manipulative tactics. Every step she took to intimidate Sarah and Emily inadvertently gave the FBI more ammunition to build their case. For Sarah, none of this was visible. She remained unaware that her battle with Karen was part of a much larger story. All she knew was that the harassment was relentless and growing more extreme by the day. Yet amidst the chaos, small signs of hope began to emerge. Some neighbors, uncomfortable with Karen's behavior, quietly distanced themselves from her. A few even reached out to Sarah privately, offering words of encouragement or sharing stories of how Karen had bullied them in the past. These gestures, though small, reminded Sarah that not everyone in the neighborhood supported Karen's crusade. Meanwhile, the advocacy group Sarah had contacted earlier played a crucial role in amplifying her voice. They helped organize awareness campaigns, distributing flyers and hosting informational sessions about disability rights and the importance of inclusivity. Local media outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the conflict and drawing attention to the broader issue of discrimination faced by disabled individuals. The publicity put additional pressure on Karen, forcing her to defend her actions publicly while scrambling to maintain her image as a champion of community values. Behind the scenes, the FBI worked tirelessly to connect the dots. They subpoenaed Karen's financial records, cross-referencing them with data from previous investigations. Patterns emerged, linking her aliases across different states and exposing the extent of her fraudulent activities. Phone records revealed suspicious communications with accomplices, further solidifying the case against her. Agents also interviewed former victims, piecing together a timeline of Karen's crimes and building a comprehensive profile of her methods. As the investigation progressed, agents debated the timing of their next move. Arresting Karen too soon risked leaving gaps in the evidence, potentially allowing her to evade justice. Waiting too long, however, meant prolonging the suffering of families like the Millers who bore the brunt of her wrath. Ultimately, they decided to let events unfold naturally, intervening only when the moment was right. That moment came sooner than expected. During one of Karen's secret HOA meetings, she made a critical mistake. In her zeal to rally support for stricter rules, she openly admitted to falsifying documents related to the Millers' property. "If we don't act now," she declared, "they'll think they can walk all over us." Unbeknownst to her, an undercover agent posing as a concerned neighbor recorded the entire conversation. This admission, a direct link between her bullying tactics and her history of fraud, was the final piece of evidence the FBI needed. With the case now airtight, agents prepared to make their move. They coordinated with local law enforcement, ensuring a swift and seamless operation. The plan was simple: arrest Karen during a public setting to minimize panic and send a clear message to the community. Timing was everything. They wanted to strike when her actions were fresh in everyone's minds, leaving no room for doubt about why she was being taken into custody. For Sarah, the breaking point came unexpectedly. After weeks of enduring harassment, she decided to confront Karen directly at the next HOA meeting. Fueled by frustration and a desire to protect her daughter, she vowed to expose Karen's hypocrisy once and for all. Little did she know, her courage would set off a chain reaction that would change the neighborhood forever. The day of the HOA meeting arrived and the air buzzed with tension. Neighbors filed into the community center's main hall, whispering among themselves as they took their seats. Normally, these gatherings were mundane affairs. Discussions about landscaping budgets, holiday decorations, or minor rule infractions. But today was different. Word had spread quickly about Sarah's decision to confront Karen directly, and everyone wanted a front-row seat to what promised to be an explosive showdown. Sarah walked into the room with her head held high, Emily by her side. She had spent hours preparing for this moment, gathering documents, legal citations, and personal testimonies to support her case. Her goal wasn't just to defend her family, it was to expose Karen's bullying tactics and demand accountability from the HOA board. For weeks, she had felt powerless against Karen's relentless attacks. Now standing before the entire neighborhood, she refused to back down. Karen, seated prominently at the head of the table, wore her trademark smirk, a look that said she believed herself untouchable. Around her sat other HOA members, some visibly uneasy, others eager to see how the drama would unfold. As the meeting began, Karen launched into her usual routine, recapping recent complaints and reminding everyone of the importance of maintaining community standards. When it came time for open discussion, Sarah stood up, drawing every eye in the room. "Thank you for letting me speak," Sarah began, her voice steady, despite the knot of nerves in her stomach. "I want to address something that's been affecting not only my family but also our entire neighborhood. Over the past few months, I've faced harassment and intimidation because of my daughter Emily's wheelchair ramp, a necessary accommodation for her disability. Instead of working with us to find solutions, certain individuals have chosen to attack us, spreading misinformation and creating division." Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Sarah continued. "This isn't just about a ramp. It's about fairness, inclusivity, and respect. Federal laws protect disabled individuals' rights to reasonable accommodations. Yet instead of honoring those rights, we've seen threats, vandalism, and attempts to silence us. This behavior is unacceptable, and it has no place in our community." Karen leaned forward, her expression hardening. "Let's not forget who's responsible for keeping this neighborhood beautiful and safe," she interjected sharply. "Rules exist for a reason. And if we start making exceptions for one person, where does it end? What kind of message are we sending to everyone else?" Her words sparked a heated debate. Voices rose as neighbors argued over whether the HOA should prioritize aesthetics or accessibility. Some sided with Karen, insisting that rules must be followed without exception. Others defended Sarah, pointing out that compassion and understanding mattered more than appearances. The room grew chaotic, with tempers flaring and accusations flying back and forth. Amid the commotion, Emily spoke up for the first time. Her soft but clear voice cut through the noise. "I'm not asking for special treatment," she said, addressing the room. "I'm asking for the same opportunities as anyone else, to feel welcome here, to move around freely, and to live without fear of being judged. The ramp doesn't take anything away from this neighborhood. It adds something important: inclusion." Her words struck a chord with many in the audience. Some neighbors nodded in agreement, while others looked ashamed, realizing how their silence had contributed to the problem. Even a few HOA members exchanged uneasy glances, questioning whether they'd been too quick to side with Karen. Just as the argument reached its peak, the doors to the community center swung open, and two men entered, one wearing a suit, the other in a police uniform. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to them. The man in the suit stepped forward, flashing a badge. "Excuse me," he said calmly but firmly. "I'm Special Agent Harris with the FBI. We need to have a word with Ms. Karen Wilkins." For a brief moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, heads swiveled toward Karen, whose face had gone pale. She stood abruptly, clutching the edge of the table as though trying to steady herself. "What is this about?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly. "You can't just barge in here like this." Agent Harris didn't respond immediately. Instead, he handed her a document, a warrant for her arrest. "Ms. Wilkins, you're under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Please come with us quietly." The room erupted into gasps and murmurs as the reality sank in. Karen, the woman who had ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist, was being led away in handcuffs. Agents explained briefly that their investigation had uncovered years of financial misconduct tied to her previous HOA roles. along with evidence linking her recent actions against the Millers to her desperate attempts to maintain control. As Karen protested loudly, claiming innocence and accusing everyone of conspiring against her, officers escorted her out of the room. When the doors closed behind them, the remaining attendees sat in stunned silence. No one knew quite what to say or do. Finally, Sarah broke the spell. "I think we've all learned something important today," she said softly. "This neighborhood deserves better than fear and division. Let's work together to create a community where everyone feels valued and respected." Her words resonated deeply. Neighbors began talking amongst themselves, sharing stories of how Karen's behavior had affected them too. Some admitted they'd been too afraid to speak up before, while others expressed relief that the truth had finally come to light. Slowly but surely, the atmosphere shifted from hostility to hope. In the days that followed, the neighborhood began to heal. With Karen gone, the HOA disbanded temporarily, allowing residents to regroup and rethink their priorities. New leadership emerged, committed to fostering inclusivity and transparency. Rules were rewritten to ensure they aligned with federal protections for disabled individuals, and efforts were made to repair relationships damaged by Karen's divisive tactics. For Sarah and Emily, life gradually returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after such turmoil. The graffiti on their garage door was scrubbed clean, and the threatening notes stopped arriving. Neighbors who had once avoided them now greeted them warmly, apologizing for their earlier silence and vowing to do better. Emily, inspired by her mother's courage, started attending art classes again, rediscovering her passion for creativity. But perhaps the most significant change was within the community itself. The arrest of Karen Wilkins served as a wake-up call, reminding everyone of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. Conversations about accessibility, fairness, and kindness became commonplace, replacing the toxic culture of judgment and exclusion that had dominated for so long. As winter approached, the neighborhood prepared for the holidays, decorating homes with twinkling lights and festive wreaths. For the first time in months, there was a sense of unity, a shared commitment to building a brighter future. And though scars remained from the battles fought, they served as reminders of resilience and triumph over adversity. Little did anyone know, however, that Karen's arrest was only the beginning of a larger reckoning. Across the country, news outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the dangers of unchecked power and the importance of protecting vulnerable communities. Advocacy groups praised Sarah and Emily for their bravery, using their experience to push for stronger laws and greater awareness. Meanwhile, federal investigators continued digging into Karen's network, uncovering connections to even bigger schemes that spanned multiple states. For Sarah, this newfound attention brought both challenges and opportunities. She became a spokesperson for disability rights, speaking at conferences and collaborating with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at preventing similar conflicts in the future. Though the journey was far from easy, she embraced her role as a voice for change, determined to turn her family's struggle into something meaningful. As for Emily, she found solace in her art, channeling her emotions into vibrant paintings and heartfelt stories. One piece, titled "The Ramp That Changed Everything," depicted a wooden wheelchair ramp bathed in golden sunlight, surrounded by smiling faces. It became a symbol of hope, not just for her family but for anyone fighting for acceptance and equality. And so, the quiet suburban neighborhood that had once been torn apart by fear and greed began to rebuild itself, brick by brick, heart by heart. Life moved forward, quieter but stronger, with lessons learned and promises made. What had started as a dispute over a simple wooden structure had transformed into a movement, a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of injustice and choosing kindness over cruelty.